Catherine, come up here, because I decided I'm going to insert myself here. I need for you all to understand one thing. Walk away today understanding that Catherine really is the pivot point in this. If you're going to do this in any other community, here are the qualities that she brought to this process that made it happen. She's got the technical knowledge, she has the experience, and she's worked on all sides of this technology divide. The second thing that is most important is that she has a deep commitment to social justice. Without that commitment to social justice, she would never have even asked the city, or they know her, but she has this bridging quality because of that commitment. The other piece is that she had put together the Community Technology Empowerment Project with that deep commitment to social justice and an ability to work with very grassroots groups, give them an AmeriCorps member to help them deal on a very community level with the tech issues that they had, whatever they were. This commitment to tech literacy, to employment, whatever it was, she was dogged about making sure that that commitment was there. With those pieces in place, she was able to pull them together very quickly. And if you don't have those pieces in place, I think you better start and go home and figure out how you put them in place. Because Jim, she knew Jim, she was connected there, got the city piece going. She had outreach into the community that, as hard as it was, if they hadn't trusted her and known her and had that deep personal commitment and know her to be trustworthy and that she would deliver, this never would have happened. So I think that if you want to do this, you need to go back to your place and figure out who that is. Maybe one person in your community can't embody all that, but you need to have those 1, 2, or 3 people there, or you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think we have this really exciting opportunity here because Catherine has for 30 years been working since she was 7, been working in community. And you cannot buy that. You can't consult it into a project. You can't really take it out of your community and put it up in City Hall because those folks are needed out there. So I just had to insert myself and say, if you're going to do this, Jim's got it. You need to, go through the city piece, but you really need to have somebody who is going to be your bridge in this process. And it was easy for a foundation because we know Catherine, and she's committed and done work for us. We could cough up $50,000 to do this and to make it happen because we care. So she needs, you can give her a standing ovation later, but she's going to tell you about the process. And Catherine, you go, girl.
Again, Joanne's been obviously a great champion in this as well. Champions are important. And I would take what she said about find 1, 2, or 3 people and go with the 2 or 3 people to pull this off in your community. If I could have cloned myself this last year, believe me, I would have. I think that the interesting part now that we're at historically in the story is after I had met with the city for about a year on one of these stakeholder groups, I realized that it wasn't authentic for me to keep going back into these meetings with the city without having actually sat in a room full of community folks that really had a chance to talk about what this wireless network or this broadband network would mean. And I went back to a couple of books I read 25 years ago, literally by Saul Alinsky, who's a community organizer, about how you organize in communities. And those of you that are from Chicago, it happened in Chicago, back of the yards. I was inspired by that stuff that I read literally in my 20s. I went back to it and I thought, how do you do this? I mean, I do website development. I lead an AmeriCorps program. I do all these other things. I know how to do network television, but how do you do this? And the rules are there. And there's 2 books. One of them is Rules for Radicals, and the other one is Reveille for Radicals, I believe. And it's like, it's all there. You know, you basically, you call a community meeting, you buy some pizza because people will be hungry, you do it in a neighborhood center where people are familiar, you partner with a neighborhood organization that is trusted, you groom that neighborhood organization to understand what the issue is so that they have buy-in, and then you basically say, everybody come on down, we're going to talk about what this thing is. We're going to give you something. We're going to give you information. We're going to help fill in the blanks. If you're curious about this, or even if you don't even know that you should be curious about this, we're going to do our best to kind of get you up to speed, and then you can decide if you want to participate in these efforts. If you want to get involved in the process, we're here to help. So that was kind of my philosophy going back to the Minneapolis Foundation and saying, you know, how can we start this community convening? Who should we be partnering with? What is the model that we should use? And I met with Joanne, and she suggested that we connect with Russ Adams from the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, because they had been working on community benefit type agreements in conjunction with land use and transit and some housing things. And I thought, gosh, that's an interesting concept. I keep thinking franchise, but this is not really a franchise environment because it's not regulated. But the CBA concept, that's curious. I had read about the Staples Center. I had heard stories about how you can attach contracts to public works kinds of projects. And it all came together over that meeting with Joanne. I eventually did sit down with Russ Adams. We forged a partnership. We got a startup grant from the MSNet Fund. And we decided early on that the way we were going to be able to make this happen was by mobilizing the AmeriCorps program, AmeriCorps members of a program that I also oversee. Now this was tricky because AmeriCorps members are not allowed to get involved in political activities, and this became political very quickly. The conversation about public ownership and private ownership and the conflict that was kind of raging for a while here in Minneapolis created an atmosphere in which we had to be very, very careful and not overstep the AmeriCorps guidelines for getting involved in a political kind of organizing event. So what we did is we made sure that our AmeriCorps members that were placed at various sites, including the Alliance office, were not doing lobbying and they were not doing political work, but they were doing outreach and education. And that was an advantage that we had here in Minneapolis that you may have to try to replicate in some other way in Chicago and in other cities. If it's using some other kind of core of volunteers or girls and boys clubs or what have you, I would say start looking now for where you're going to find some energy. Just like any campaign, just like running any kind of campaign, we ran a campaign. And we had boots on the ground to help us do it. And it wasn't really until this last weekend when I was putting together this little history of the initiative that I realized all these different points at which those AmeriCorps members played pivotal roles, because I couldn't be at every community meeting and I couldn't be handing out flyers in all of these communities. And yet with 6 or 7 of our members in Minneapolis doing this and helping with things like developing a survey. I did the actual survey questions, but they translated it into 4 languages. They printed out hundreds of copies at their nonprofit, so we didn't have to pay for printing. They left them on the counter at health intake centers and places where kids were getting vaccinations for school. They went out and they thought about, where are the people that we need to reach? Where do they congregate? Where will we find our constituents that are not online that could really benefit from this initiative? And we basically just kind of took it to the streets. We did it the old-fashioned way. We put up flyers. We handed out lots of paper surveys. We eventually got back over 450 community surveys about what needs existed in communities around technology. It was the first time that we'd ever really asked the question, what do you need? So the wireless initiative gave us some opportunities to get some information about an issue that we're all very close to, but we'd really never collected any data. We're so busy doing service projects and working through nonprofit projects that seldom have we had a chance to say, okay, aside from the executive director of your agency, you who are visiting this community technology center, what are your needs? How much is too much to pay for broadband? Do you want free access, or is training more important? So I think it was very important to understand that, you know, having some very dedicated, not dedicated, it's part of their job, I mean they're dedicated, but this was their job for the year, is to do this kind of work, so we really had that built in. That's not going to be something that you see when you read the Community Benefits Agreement, but you need to understand that that's a lot of how it happened. We got a grant from MSNet that the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability basically oversaw, and what we did with that is we did a lot of community convening. I think we did 20 plus meetings over the course of an 8-month period. The meetings were very well attended, especially in the beginning. I think the initial kickoff meetings had upwards of 30 people. As the winter wore on and some of the more challenging aspects of the project came into play, a lot of controversy around public ownership, we saw some folks fall off, we saw new people come in, but at the end of the day, we averaged between 15 and 20 people at most of those meetings, and there was a core of community activists that had played an instrumental role in this project, and two of them are right here. Peter Fleck and Kurt Kimber, can you please stand up? These are community activists who are not on anyone's payroll that helped write the first community benefits agreement. Thank you for your work. If there's anybody else here that worked on that I'm not seeing, let me know you're here. A lot of people went to a lot of meetings, but Kurt in particular spent hours writing drafts of what would eventually become a community benefits agreement, because after the coalition had spent all winter and into the spring having community meetings, they released a report. That report went then to the task force. The task force was formed to broaden the conversation. I went to City Hall, I said, I need a budget, we need to hire some facilitators, we need to do a task force. We need to get schools at the table, we need to get libraries at the table, we need to get unions at the table. We need a lot more stakeholders to talk about this than just the folks that were coming to these community meetings. And so we did the task force thing, and what happened was we brought in people from the coalition who had done this report, and they presented what they had found. They presented the surveys that they had collected. We combined all of this, and as a task force, we reviewed that data. So instead of having two different bodies that were competing for kind of the authority on this, what we did is we melded two that had very different focuses and very different constituencies into what would become the final task force agreement. The task force report basically says we went off of the coalition's report, I think in maybe 75 or 80% of the cases. It was just like line item. We read through them, we looked at the rationale for them, and the task force felt that was good to go with. There were a couple of things that we changed. We doubled the amount of money up front that we thought was necessary. We made some changes to what our request would be out of the task force. We initially did ask for no-cost service. We knew that we probably wouldn't get it, but we thought it was a good thing to start with in a negotiation. And by the way, I think that the work of that initial group was very well reflected in the final task force report. One of the things that happened in the course of these events was in February of last year, City Council held a Ways and Means meeting at which they would decide to move forward or not with this plan that BIS had put together, the business case. And so many people wanted to talk about it that they decided to make it a public hearing. And of course, there were a lot of people there that were there to say, you know, we think we should go back to the beginning. We think this should be publicly owned. We don't like the way the city is doing this plan. But there were also a number of people in the room from the coalition and from our nonprofit community technology centers that came to say, you know what, we think the business plan is fine the way it is. What we really want to see is a community benefits agreement. We want to make sure that whatever happens, really public or private, we want to make sure that the public is served by whatever contract occurs that will bring broadband to Minneapolis. And that was compelling testimony. I mean, there's nothing more important than having 5 or 6 people go to a city council meeting and say, I serve people in the communities we're talking about, or I am from the communities that we are talking about. These are the issues that we see on the ground. This is why we need this. So we weren't acting as proxies for these people. These people were in the room. And they were why the city council, I think, decided to insist, not desire, but actually require that the vendors respond to community development and an actual community benefits agreement as part of the contract. It was a pivotal meeting, and it was a pivotal point in us actually ending up where we ended up with a legally binding community benefits agreement. If it had remained a desired, not a required, chances are that the vendors would have said, well, you know, it'd be nice if, you know, we gave you a website with some information on it. How would that be? Or, you know, maybe we'll give you $100,000 and a bunch of free computers. How would that be? But they didn't get away with that because it was fairly clear from the RFP that the bar had been raised and that the expectation was that they come to the table as partners to make sure that the entire city of Minneapolis benefited from this network. Not just the creative class, not just the city departments and people with handheld Palm Pilots that could get wireless, but everybody got something out of the deal. That's where the social activist in me obviously comes from. I was like, all right, if everybody's in on this, what does everybody mean? And one of the things that I know that Michael noticed and a lot of people are talking about is that in the community benefits term sheet, there's a little bit of something for everyone. I mean, we didn't get everything, but we got a very broad array of services and products and funding to do more that I think will cover a lot of gaps in both service and information delivery in this city. It'll be very exciting to see how the fund gets set up, what the guidelines will be. They'll come probably right out of the recommendations from both the coalition and the task force reports. There's been a lot of work already done on what those guidelines should look like, but we need to formalize that. The task force met this last Friday, and we entertained a proposal from the Minneapolis Foundation. We're looking at a couple of options. We will be using a community foundation for this fund, and we'll be helping to set the guidelines and really help determine how the task force can evolve into a community-based set of representatives to really determine what the fund, where the fund will be granted out to on an ongoing basis. There's a lot of work yet to be done, but we're awfully close to being able to make that announcement and say, this is where the fund's going to be, this is what it's going to go to fund. You know, the first RFP will be 12, 18 months, whatever it is, but we're looking forward to making that announcement in the near future. I wanted to leave enough time for questions and answers, and also to give anyone who worked on either the coalition or the task force an opportunity to either rebut my history or add to it. I think that there was a lot of times during the last 18 months where we were really tired and we didn't know if we were going to be able to pull this off. But we always kind of brought each other back up, and the possibility remained, so we all kind of kept moving forward. I think that's all I really have to say about how it went. Excuse me, I'm of course battling a cold now that it's all over. I waited to get sick until it was done. Community engagement. You know, there's no substitute for doing it the old-fashioned way. That's all I can say. I would have loved to do this all by email. It would have been so nice to do it from the comfort of my home office, but I spent very many Tuesday and Wednesday nights at community meetings last year. And those of you that are going to approach this work in other cities, clear your calendar, because you know, your spouses will be mad at you, your dogs will not recognize you, your clients will go away. All of these things will happen, but it's a good fight. I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I think that we all knew that we had a historic opportunity here, and all of us are glad for the time that we put into it. So I'll entertain any questions or comments as I get a drink of water. Yeah.
Catherine, I'm Diane Calback from Chicago. I work, very closely with Lowry and Michael. They've been great, very helpful in our process. The question I have is, did you have seed funding from a winning vendor, and do you anticipate being able to leverage additional money from private foundations with that seed funding? And then, it's a two-part question. The second part would be, what do you anticipate, do you have projections on revenue that you anticipate receiving from the contract? And when are you starting to disperse the funds? We can repeat that again.
Okay. First of all, the seed funding came from the Minneapolis MSNet fund and the Minneapolis Foundation. They were able to turn that around very quickly. We asked for a $40,000 grant. That helped pay for the AmeriCorps member as well as all the community meetings and building a website. And we actually, one of the most fun things we did with that money is we paid kids in communities to go out and do surveys during community events, like at June 13th and a couple other events. We put some money into kids' pockets, little mini grants. It was really good to have some disposable income to work with. I mean, we had some discretionary funds all of a sudden that came in really helpful down the stretch because we got no money from the vendors. They had a big investment in the pilot projects because they were expected to build 1 square mile wireless networks to prove their concepts. technologically. And so since they put so much money into that, there's, it was a struggle getting them to pay for, pop and cake and whatever at those events for the launch. So what we did is we used that original organizing money to bring communities together, especially for the launch. I mean, we had 2 big launch parties, one north and one south side, where we had the vendors there, we had our AmeriCorps members showing people why the technology mattered. You could sign up for a free account. Those were both very well attended. We worked with community partners to do it. And if we hadn't really been able to have discretionary funds to quickly pay for the kind of things that needed to happen, it just wouldn't have happened. These nonprofits didn't have any money, and neither did we. So the seed funding was really critical. The way that we're going to leverage this initial fund is already underway. We're looking at asking different technology, especially technology-focused foundations that are both local and hopefully national, to contribute so that when we announce the fund, it can be larger than the original $500,000 that's coming from the vendor. We'd like to see that be at least $1 million. And it's difficult because in the past they haven't given us money before, but it's a lot easier now because we can say, well, we've got this great start. Wouldn't you like your name to be up there? So we're working with that. Jim has been really great at starting to have those conversations for us. It really helps to have folks like him open the door to say, hey, I talked to so-and-so at a conference and they might be amenable. So we're starting to try to get the ball rolling on that. We are looking at, we're going to get $200,000 at signing or shortly thereafter. So in the next month, we expect a check for $200,000 to go into a fund. After that, when the network is finished being built, which will be 9 to 12 months, hopefully, there'll be another $300,000 deposit made. So that will be the $500,000 up front. I would expect that would start, that the first RFPs would go out right about then to either do mini grants or some kind of funding. And it's not up to me to say how that will go out, but it'll be very interesting to see what the first funding guidelines look like. I know with some other settlements or with other pots of money, some of the first things that have gotten funded are research on how the fund should be spent. So I may actually try to advocate a little bit for that. They did that in California and it worked out. It was really smart money to spend the first year looking at the breadth and the depth of the problem, say, well, what are best practices, what really works, and where should this money go? So it may be something like that, or it may simply be mini grants right away, because when the network launches is the most exciting time and the best time to get more people online, and we don't want to miss that opportunity. We want to have some initiatives going right away to get people that have not been online before to sign up, to take classes, and to do the things that will get them onto this network. Does that answer all 3 of your questions? Did I get them?
Yeah.
All right.
Or I guess the one part is, well, no, I guess you start to expect the final $300,000 after the network's built, and then projected out what we receive for.
Okay, because of the way that the contract is structured, we probably won't see another big deposit for a while because it's going to take a while for the vendor to start signing up accounts and making money. And the money into this fund comes from the money that they make. So realistically, in the first 2 years of operation, we don't see a lot of money coming in. Another important reason why we need to leverage this, why we can't just expect that this is going to be this big pot of money. The truth is, it's not that much money. And the problem is large, and the timeline is limited. So that's one of the reasons we want to use this to really encourage other funds to be combined, especially during that bridge period of years 1 and 2. Then we start looking at years 3, 4, and 5, and you can see on the charts provided to us by the vendors that as the take rate goes up, the amount that goes into the fund increases, so that between years 7 and 10, the total amount that goes into that fund could be anywhere between 10 and maybe $15 million, thousands. I'm still thinking my budgets. No, this would be in the millions now. We add a couple zeros to what I'm used to working with, but we can see the fund having a long-term value. Hopefully, it'll be 2 to 3 times that. I think to really make a dent in this, it's going to have to be at least double that. Plus, we're making up for the last 10 years where very few organizations or foundations funded this in the Twin Cities. We have not seen any kind of really adequate technology funding for a very long time, so we've got a lot of catching up to do. That's a little personal editorial. Any of you that are funders, I'm not going to apologize because you know I feel that way. Other questions or comments or?
I'm not that familiar with the public service agreement, but was there anything in there for uploading data from community organizations and bandwidth that might be provided by the provider to community organizations at a reduced or per gratis charge, where our community groups could get their information out without having to pay a huge sum of money?
There's a couple of ways to answer that. One of the components of the community benefits agreement is a community server, essentially. Is a great big robust server with lots of bandwidth that communities can use to run SQL databases or experiment with PHP. Actually, Kurt, I think that was your idea. I think that came out of an idea that you and a couple other people said, you know, we should always have a testing platform, we should have an opportunity to have basically an online playground for community projects. So that server is going to be maintained by the vendor. We're going to also have quite a bit of community content. We won essentially control of the portal page, which is a huge win. When you are in Minneapolis and you're driving around or you're outside in a park and you open up your laptop and you pull down from your list of available networks, when you pull down Wireless Minneapolis, you will see a neighborhood portal page that reflects the area that you're in, has community content on it that's designed by the community. We're going to have some guidelines about what's appropriate and what's not. You're going to always have to have certain links as part of the agreement, city website, 211, some of those things. But all of them are community focused. None of them are vendor focused. So there'll be.
Everybody keeps bringing me video, and video is expensive.
Right. Well, you can put that money into another program because you'll be able to do that on this network. There won't be. As far as I'm reading right now in the contract, there are no limits on how much bandwidth or content the portal pages take. Remember, for an ISP of this size, that's not their biggest, that's a drop in the bucket. It's not even worth it for them to measure really how much bandwidth you're using putting up a video. You know, if you're doing it right, it can be streaming video and it won't really affect the network that much. Now, that being done and said, there will be guidelines for content. You know, what kind of file size it needs to be, what the format needs to be. You know, we're all going to be using the same system. Every neighborhood in Minneapolis is going to be using the same system to post information. So of course there's going to have to be training and there's going to have to be some guidelines. But outside of that, it's a wonderful opportunity. I know that your project has got some North Side portal stuff already going on. Well, what a great jumpstart you're going to have, okay? Because otherwise, in some neighborhoods they don't have anything. They're going to basically have a template up when the network launches. There's a look here for future neighborhood information, because not all neighborhoods are at the same place. But I know that your neighborhood on the North Side has been working very well on a portal, and those will be incorporated. We may just link to those for the time being, who knows? All these decisions have yet to be made, but chances are you will have plenty of opportunity for community-based content to be on that portal page. It's a huge deal to get the portal page. This was one of the things that we struggled with in contract negotiations, okay? Because the vendors saw that as an opportunity for advertising revenue, and we saw that as really their goodwill back to the city. They're using our right-of-way. And so the deal that we cut lets us have control of that. We also get 100% of the advertising revenues off those pages, okay? So if neighborhoods want to go sell, if your neighborhood organization wants to go to your local coffee shop or your local YMCA and sell advertising for their programs on your portal page, that money goes back into the fund to pay for more community content to get made.